The massive space station hung in the darkness like a giant silver wheel. Inside its gleaming halls, beings from across the galaxy gathered around a circular table that could seat thousands. The Galactic Council was meeting, and the air buzzed with tension. Elder Vexus stood at the center of the chamber. His body was made of living crystal that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. When he spoke, his voice rang like bells through the translation devices. "We are here to discuss the humans," he said. The chamber fell silent. "They want to join our military alliance. I say we must refuse." Commander Zorak laughed. The sound was harsh and grating. His thick gray skin was covered in scars from 100 battles. "You fear a species that barely knows how to travel between stars? My people have conquered 17 worlds. What could these humans possibly do that worries you?" Vexus turned his crystalline head toward the Threxian commander. "That is exactly what worries me. You think of war as conquest. You follow rules. You have honor codes. Humans do not." "Explain," said Chancellor Mort, her blue tentacles writhing with curiosity. The Zalani were known for their careful thinking. If she was interested, others would listen. Vexus walked to the center of the chamber, where a holographic display showed Earth. The blue and green planet rotated slowly as data scrolled beside it. "I have studied their history," Vexus said. "In the past 100 years alone, they fought 2 global wars. Wars where entire cities were burned to ash, where civilians were targets, not accidents. They created weapons that could destroy their entire world, then built thousands of them." Zorak waved a clawed hand dismissively. "Many species go through violent periods. We did. You did. They will grow past it." "Will they?" Vexus touched the display and new images appeared. Battlefields covered in mud and blood. Cities reduced to rubble. "They call it their Great War. Millions died in trenches fighting over strips of land. They used poison gas that melted lungs. They sent young soldiers to charge into machine gun fire, knowing they would die." The chamber stirred uneasily. Even the warrior races found such tactics disturbing. "But that was long ago," protested Senator Clicks, her insect-like features clicking nervously. "They have surely learned better ways." "Have they?" Vexus changed the display again. 20 years later, they fought again. This time they built camps where they murdered millions of their own kind. They dropped bombs that turned entire cities into glass. When one side built better defenses, the other side found new ways to kill. Commander Zorak leaned forward. Despite his dismissive words, he was listening now. "What kind of new ways?" "They learned to fight in jungles where you cannot see the enemy. They hid bombs along roads where supply trucks would drive. They dressed like farmers during the day and killed soldiers at night. When armies tried to find them, they had already melted back into the population." "Guerrilla warfare," muttered General Hex, his 4 arms crossing over his armored chest. "Cowardly, but effective." "Not cowardly," Vexus corrected. "Practical. Humans do not fight to prove their honor. They fight to win. When they cannot win with strength, they win with cunning. When they cannot win with cunning, they win with brutality. When they cannot win with brutality, they find new kinds of brutality." The display showed more images. Soldiers in thick jungles, cities under siege, ships burning in harbors. "Look at their conflicts," Vexus continued. "In every war, they learned something new about killing. They learned to fight in deserts, in forests, in mountains, in cities. They learned to fight from the air, under the water, and in space. Each time they face a new enemy, they adapt." Chancellor Mort's tentacles had stopped moving. She was thinking hard. "You believe they would adapt to fighting us?" "I believe they would adapt to fighting anyone," Vexus said. "That is what makes them dangerous. We follow the galactic conventions of war. We protect civilians. We treat prisoners with dignity. We fight with honor. Humans have conventions too, but they break them when convenient. Zorak's scarred face showed doubt for the first time. You are saying they have no honor? I am saying they have different priorities, Vexus replied. Honor is less important to them than survival. Rules are less important than victory. They will do whatever they must to protect their own. The chamber erupted in conversation. Beings spoke in dozens of languages while translation devices worked overtime. Some voices were angry, others worried, a few excited. The void swarm grows stronger, Zorak said when the noise died down. My fleets lose ground every day. We need every advantage we can get. If these humans can help us win, I will use them. That is what I am afraid of, Vexus said quietly. You think you will use them. You think you will control them. You think you can point them at your enemies and they will fight like civilized soldiers. You are wrong. Then what do you suggest? Demanded Zorak. Let the swarm consume more worlds while we debate human nature? Vexus was quiet for a long moment. His crystal body dimmed as he considered his words carefully. I suggest we remember that some weapons are too dangerous to use. A blade can cut your enemy, but it can also cut your hand. These humans are like a blade with no handle. They will cut whoever touches them. Enough philosophy. Zorak stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow across the chamber. My people are dying. 3 colony worlds have gone silent in the past month. The swarm adapts faster than we can respond. If the humans can help, I will take that help. Other delegates began to speak. The Cathara supported Vexus, as they always did when he spoke of caution. The Zalani wanted more time to study the issue. The warrior races sided with Zorak, hungry for any advantage against their ancient enemy. As the debate raged, Vexus stood silent at the center of the chamber. He had done what he could. He had given his warning. Now the council would decide whether to listen. Meanwhile, millions of light years away, Captain Jake Morrison sat in a briefing room on Earth. The walls were covered with star charts and tactical displays. Across from him sat Lieutenant Amy Parker, Sergeant Danny Walsh, and Specialist Lisa Rodriguez. Orders just came through, Morrison said, holding up a data pad. We have been accepted into a probationary alliance with the Threxian Empire. Pack your gear. We ship out tomorrow. Amy looked up from the alien weapon she was studying. What kind of war are we walking into, sir? Morrison looked at the tactical reports. Entire worlds consumed, fleets destroyed, an enemy that seemed to learn from every defeat. The kind where everything we learned about fighting might actually matter. Danny grinned as he cleaned his rifle. About time someone wanted to see what humans can do in a real fight. Morrison hoped the young sergeant would still be grinning when he learned what that really meant. But orders were orders, and Earth needed allies. If the galaxy wanted to see what humans could do in war, they were about to find out. The council session ended with a close vote. The humans would be allowed to join the alliance on a trial basis. Vexus sat alone in the empty chamber afterward, staring at the holographic display of Earth. He had tried to warn them. They had not listened. Now they would all learn together what happened when you gave humans a war to fight. He only hoped some of them would survive the lesson. The Threxian flagship cut through space like a silver arrow. Its hull was smooth and perfect, covered in energy shields that made it shimmer like a mirage. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, watching alien stars through the viewing window. Impressive. Ship, said Lieutenant Amy Parker. She ran her hand along a control panel that responded to her touch with soft, musical tones. Admiral Korth turned from his command station. The Threxian was tall and lean, with gray skin marked by ritual scars. His black eyes held no warmth when he looked at the humans. This vessel has weapons that could glass your entire homeworld, he said in perfect English. Our shields can stop anything your species has ever built. Our tactical computers can calculate battle outcomes before the first shot is fired. Sergeant Danny Walsh looked up from the rifle he was cleaning. Sounds nice, How is that working out against these void? Swarm things! Korth's scars darkened with anger. We will adapt. Threxian military doctrine has conquered 17 star systems. We do not lose wars. But you are losing this one, said Lisa Rodriguez quietly. She was studying the tactical displays that showed red zones where the swarm had taken control. More than half the map was red. The bridge fell silent. Several Threxian officers turned to stare at the human communication specialist. No one spoke to Admiral Korth that way. Morrison stepped forward before the situation could get worse. We are here to help, Admiral. Show us what we are fighting. Korth touched a control, and the main display lit up with images that made the humans step back. The void swarm ships looked like they were grown instead of built. Black and twisted, they moved through space like living things. When they touched planets, the worlds began to change. Green turned to gray. Blue oceans became black pools. They consume everything, Korth explained. Organic matter, metals, even the atmosphere. They break it all down and use it to build more of themselves. We estimate they have destroyed over 2,000 inhabited worlds in the past century. Amy studied the tactical data. How do they fight? What are their weapons? They adapt, said Commander Thrix, Korth's second in command. When we use energy weapons, they develop resistance. When we use kinetic rounds, they grow armor. When we change tactics, they change faster. But they must have weaknesses, Morrison said. If they do, we have not found them, Korth replied. They do not negotiate. They do not retreat. They do not take prisoners. They simply consume until nothing remains. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Through the windows, the humans could see the Kepler 442 system. 3 planets orbited a yellow star, and all 3 were under attack. Look, whispered Lisa. Swarm bioships hung around the planets like black clouds. They were enormous, some larger than Earth's moon. Smaller craft moved between them like insects around a hive. On the planet's surfaces, gray infection spread outward from landing sites. The population of those worlds is 12 billion, Korth said. We have 6 hours to stop the consumption process, or they all die. The Threxian fleet was already in position. Hundreds of sleek warships hung in perfect formation. Energy weapons powered up with mechanical precision. Shields strengthened to maximum power. Morrison watched the preparations with growing unease. Everything was so orderly, so predictable. Admiral, how do you usually attack? Standard tactical. Doctrine, Korth replied proudly. Formation Alpha 7. Energy bombardment of enemy positions, followed by precise ground assault with predetermined objectives. We will clear each sector systematically until resistance is eliminated. And this has worked before? Amy asked. Against every enemy we have faced, Commander Thrix said. Threxian tactics are flawless. The attack began exactly as described. The fleet moved into position with mechanical precision. Energy weapons fired in coordinated volleys. The first wave of swarm bioships simply absorbed the energy and kept coming. Shields failing on the Dominion's pride, reported a tactical officer. Morrison watched in horror as swarm vessels phased through the Threxian shields like they were not there. The alien bioships had adapted in real time. How is that possible? Korth demanded. They learn, Danny said grimly. You hit them with energy. They learn to eat energy. You probably just fed them. More Threxian ships fell as swarm vessels swarmed over them. The perfect formations broke apart as individual ships tried to escape. But the bioships were faster, more agile, and they learned from every defensive move. Ground assault teams report total resistance, Commander Thrix announced. Standard energy weapons are ineffective. Swarm ground forces show immunity to all conventional ordnance. On the tactical display, Morrison could see Threxian soldiers dying in neat, organized lines. They advanced according to doctrine while swarm creatures tore them apart. Their weapons, so effective against conventional enemies, might as well have been toys. "Admiral," Morrison said, "we need to get down there." "Impossible," Korth replied. "Standard protocol requires fleet superiority before ground deployment. We must maintain formation and continue bombardment until enemy shields fail." "They do not have shields," Amy pointed out. "They have adaptation. Your bombardment is just teaching them to be stronger." More ships died as swarm biovessels learned to phase through armor as well as shields. The perfect Threxian fleet was being picked. Apart piece by piece, Morrison made a decision that would change everything. He turned to his team. "Gear up. We are going down." "The Admiral has not authorized ground deployment," Commander Thrix protested. "The Admiral can court-martial me later," Morrison replied. "If there is a later." Korth watched in amazement as the humans armed themselves. Their weapons were primitive chemical projectiles. Their armor was simple metal and ceramic. They had no energy shields, no quantum computers, no advanced targeting systems. "You will die in minutes," he said. "Maybe," Morrison replied, checking his rifle. "But we will not die standing in formation waiting for permission." The human dropship was as primitive as their weapons. It had no shields, no phase technology, no adaptive armor. It was just a metal box with rockets attached. Somehow it made it through the swarm defenses while advanced Threxian craft were shot down. "How?" Korth muttered, watching the primitive craft disappear into the planet's atmosphere. On the surface, Morrison and his team found themselves in hell. The swarm had turned the once green world into a nightmare of black corruption. Twisted structures grew from the ground like cancer. The air itself seemed alive, thick with floating spores that tried to attach to anything they touched. "Standard approach is not going to work here," Amy said, watching swarm creatures tear apart a Threxian squad 200 meters away. The Threxians were fighting exactly as they had been trained. Advance in formation. Establish fire zones. Maintain communication with command. Follow doctrine. They were dying because the swarm did not care about doctrine. Morrison watched a creature that looked like a cross between a spider and a tank rip through Threxian armor like paper. The aliens were shooting it with energy weapons that did absolutely nothing. "Danny," he said quietly. "Sir, remember that ugly business in Afghanistan? The cave systems?" Danny grinned, but it was not a nice grin. "I remember." "Good. Lisa, can you jam their communications?" "Their neural network operates on quantum frequencies. I can try to interfere with it." "Amy, still got those explosive charges from the demolitions course?" "Full pack, sir." Morrison looked at his team. They were outnumbered 1,000,000 to 1 on an alien world fighting an enemy that adapted to everything. By all military logic, they should retreat and wait for backup. Instead, he smiled. "All right, people. Time to show these things what human warfare really looks like. Forget everything they taught you about fighting fair. We are going hunting." What happened next would be talked about in hushed whispers throughout the galaxy for generations. The humans did not fight like civilized soldiers. They fought like humans. They used the swarm's own biology against them. They turned corpses into bombs. They poisoned water supplies that the creatures needed to grow. They attacked at night when the hive mind was dormant. They struck at communication nodes and breeding centers instead of military targets. Most horrifying. Of all, they seemed to enjoy it. Admiral Korth watched from orbit as human tactics turned the tide of battle. For the first time since the war began, swarm forces were retreating. But as he watched the primitive humans tear through his most feared enemy, he began to understand Elder Vexus's warning. These creatures were not soldiers. They were something far more dangerous. The reports spread through the Threxian fleet like wildfire. Word of the human tactics reached every ship, every officer, every soldier. What had seemed impossible was happening. The Void Swarm was retreating. Admiral Korth stood in his command, center reading field reports that made his claws clench. The humans had taken a planet that his best troops could not hold. They had done it with primitive weapons and methods that violated every rule of civilized warfare. "How many humans are down there?" he asked Commander Thrix. "4, sir. Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Parker, Sergeant Walsh, and Specialist Rodriguez. 4. Korth looked at the tactical display, where red zones were turning blue as swarm forces fled. 4 humans did what a division of my soldiers could not. Sir, we are receiving requests from other battle groups. They want human advisors." Korth was quiet for a long moment. He thought about Elder Vexus's warning. Some weapons were too dangerous to use. But his people were dying across a dozen worlds. If the humans could save them, grant the requests, he said finally. Deploy human teams to all active fronts. On the ice world of Helios 7, technical specialist Kevin Brooks stepped off a transport ship into a blizzard. The Threxian base was a cluster of heated domes connected by covered walkways. It looked comfortable and efficient. "Welcome to Helios 7, said Colonel Reck, the base commander. "I hope you can help us. The swarm has taken the northern continent. They seem immune to cold weather operations." Kevin looked at the tactical maps. The swarm had built massive heating stations that were melting the ice caps. They were turning the planet's own climate against its defenders. "You have been fighting them here?" Kevin asked. "For 3 months. We follow standard cold weather protocols. Insulated equipment, heated bunkers, thermal imaging for night operations. But they adapt faster than we can adjust." Kevin studied the maps more carefully. He was not thinking like a soldier. He was thinking like an engineer. "This heating system, they built," he said. "It draws power from geothermal vents?" "Correct. They tap directly into the planet's core. And your water treatment plants are still operational?" Colonel Vreck looked confused. "Yes, but what does that have to do with military operations?" Kevin smiled in a way that would have worried Elder Vexus. "Everything." What Kevin did over the next week shocked the Threxian defenders. He did not attack the swarm's military positions. Instead, he targeted their infrastructure. But not in any way the aliens expected. He turned the water treatment plants into chemical weapon factories. The drinking water that fed swarm bioforms was suddenly full of industrial acids. The communications network that connected Threxian bases became a weapon when Kevin used it to broadcast frequencies that disrupted swarm neural patterns. Most disturbing of all, he taught the Threxians how to weaponize their own cities. Streets became channels for explosive traps. Buildings became collapse points that could bury entire swarm formations. The very infrastructure that supported civilization became a weapon against those who would consume it. "This is not warfare," Colonel Rex said, as he watched human-designed traps tear apart swarm assault groups. "This is something else. This is survival," Kevin replied. "The question is whether you want to survive." On the jungle world of Verdant 3, Dr. Rachel Collins made a discovery that changed everything. She was not a soldier. She was a xenobiologist who had volunteered for combat duty because she wanted to study the swarm up close. What she found in her makeshift laboratory would have horrified any civilized researcher. She had been experimenting on captured swarm bioforms, trying to understand how their hive-mind communication worked. "Captain Morrison," she said over the communication link, "I need to speak with you immediately." Morrison was knee-deep in a swamp, setting charges around a swarm breeding pool. "Kinda busy here, Doc. Can it wait?" "No, it cannot. I have discovered something about the swarm's neural network. It operates on quantum frequencies that are remarkably similar to human brain patterns." Morrison paused in his work. "Meaning, what?" "Meaning we are naturally compatible with their communication system. That is why they seem to anticipate our moves sometimes. They can read our thoughts." "That is bad news." "Actually, it might be good news. If we can read their thoughts, we can interfere with them. We can jam their communications by thinking specific patterns. Captain, we can turn our minds into weapons." What followed was the most disturbing development in a war full of disturbing developments. The humans learned to weaponize their own consciousness. They discovered they could disrupt swarm coordination by projecting specific thought patterns. They could cause confusion, fear, even panic in creatures that had never known such emotions, but the process changed them. Soldiers who learned to think like weapons began to act like weapons. They became cold, calculating, ruthless in ways that disturbed even their alien allies. The tide of war shifted dramatically. Across a dozen worlds, human advisors taught alien. Soldiers knew ways to fight. Ways that worked, but at a cost that no one had calculated. On Zentari Prime, Elder Vexus called another emergency session of the Galactic Council. The reports from the front lines were disturbing in ways he had not foreseen. "The humans are winning," he announced to the assembled delegates. "They are pushing back the Void Swarm on every front. But you need to see how they are doing it." The holographic display showed battlefields from across the galaxy. Human-advised forces were indeed winning, but their methods made the assembled aliens uncomfortable. On Helios 7, Threxian soldiers were using chemical weapons that made the ice itself poisonous. On Verdant 3, entire forests were being burned to deny the swarm cover. On the mining world of Titan 9, humans had taught the defenders to collapse tunnel systems, burying friend and foe alike. "They do not follow the galactic conventions of war," Vexus said. "They take no prisoners because the swarm offers no quarter. They target civilian infrastructure because everything is a weapon to them. They use biological warfare, chemical warfare, psychological warfare. They fight without limits." Commander Zorak shifted uneasily in his seat. The reports from his own forces were similar. The humans were effective, but they were changing his soldiers, teaching them to think like predators instead of warriors. "The War Crimes Tribunal will have a field day when this is over," muttered Senator Clix. "What crimes?" asked Chancellor Mort. "Crimes against whom? The Void Swarm does not recognize any laws of war. They consume everything. How do you commit war crimes against a force that shows no mercy?" "By becoming like them," Vexus said quietly. "The humans are not just fighting the swarm. They are outmonstering them. They are winning by being more ruthless, more adaptive, more willing to cross any line necessary." The chamber fell silent as delegates considered this. The humans were saving the galaxy, but at what cost? "I have more disturbing news," Vexus continued. "Our psychologists have been studying the human advisors. They are changing. Combat exposure is affecting them in ways we did not expect. They are becoming different." New reports appeared on the display. Human soldiers who no longer showed normal emotional responses. Advisors who spoke of enemy casualties as numbers instead of lives. Teams that seemed to enjoy the killing more than the victory. "Major Chris Turner returned from a deep strike mission last week," Vexus read from a report. "He brought back trophies made from swarm biomatter. When asked why, he said it was to remember the hunt. He referred to combat operations as hunting." More reports followed. Humans collecting swarm body parts as souvenirs. Human advisors experimenting on captured swarm entities to develop new torture methods. Human soldiers who had begun to see all non-humans as potential enemies. "They are becoming what they fight," Vexus concluded, "and they are teaching our soldiers to become the same thing." Admiral Korth received the Council's concerns through official channels, but he had more immediate problems. 3 more star systems had come under attack, and his forces were spread thin across 24 worlds. "Deploy more human advisors," he ordered. "Whatever the Council thinks about their methods, they work." "Sir," Commander Thrix said carefully, "some of the human teams are requesting permission to conduct deep strike operations against swarm core worlds. They want to take the fight directly to the enemy's home territory." Korth looked at the strategic display. The swarm controlled hundreds of worlds in the dark regions beyond mapped space. A direct assault would require tactics that no civilized military would consider. What kind of operations are they proposing? Biological warfare using captured swarm organisms, systematic destruction of all life support systems, Complete sterilization of planetary biospheres. Thrix paused. They want to make the swarm worlds uninhabitable for any form of life. Korth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control. The humans were proposing genocide on a galactic scale. They wanted to kill not just the swarm, but every world the swarm had touched. And if we refuse? They say will find another way. Captain Morrison's exact words were, "With or without permission, this war ends." Korth thought about Elder Vexus's warning one more time. Some weapons were too dangerous to use, but the Void Swarm had to be stopped. And the humans were the only force that had proven capable of stopping them. He authorized the deep strike operations. By the time he realized his mistake, it would be too late for everyone. The alert sirens on Threxia Prime had been screaming for 6 hours. 3 billion Threxians looked up at skies that were black with Void Swarm bioships. The massive vessels blotted out the sun as they began the horrific process of planetary consumption. Admiral Korth stood in the Planetary Defense Center, watching his homeworld die. Every defense satellite had been overwhelmed. The orbital platforms were silent hulks drifting in space. The swarm had brought everything they had for this final assault. "Evacuation ships are launching from the southern continent," reported General Morks. "But we can only save a fraction of the population." Korth looked at the tactical display. Red zones spread across the planet's surface like a plague. Where the swarm touched ground, the very soil turned black and began to bubble. Trees withered and died. Lakes became pools of acid. The planet was being consumed alive. "How long before total conversion?" he asked. 18 hours, came the reply. "After that, nothing will remain but raw materials for more swarm ships." A communication alert chimed. Captain Morrison's face appeared on the main screen. He looked different than he had 6 months ago. His eyes were colder, harder. There were new scars on his face and something dark in his expression. "Admiral," Morrison said without preamble, "I am requesting immediate operational command of all human assets in this system. Captain, this is not the time for chain of command disputes. My world is dying." "That is exactly why this is the time," Morrison replied. "You have been fighting this war with one hand tied behind your back. Rules of engagement, civilian protection, protocols, prisoner treatment guidelines. All of that ends now." Korth felt a chill. "What are you proposing?" "Protocol 0. Complete operational freedom. No restrictions, no oversight, no rules except victory." Morrison's image flickered as explosions rocked the communication relay. "The question is simple, Admiral. Do you want to save your people or do you want to fight with honor?" Around the command center, Threxian officers listened with growing unease. They had seen what human advisors could do when given limited freedom. The thought of unlimited human warfare was terrifying. "And if I refuse?" Korth asked. Morrison smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "Then in 18 hours, your homeworld becomes another swarm breeding ground, and we find someone else who is serious about winning this war." Korth looked at the strategic display. Half his planet was already gone. His children, his mate, his entire civilization hung in the balance. Elder Vexus's warnings seemed less important than the screams coming from the surface. "You have operational command," he said quietly. "Good. All Threxian forces are to withdraw to minimum safe distance. Do not interfere with human operations under any circumstances. And, Admiral, you might want to stop watching the tactical feeds. What happens next is not going to be pleasant." What followed was the most controversial military campaign in galactic history. The humans did not just fight the Void Swarm. They waged total war against everything the swarm represented. Specialist Tony Martinez had spent months studying captured swarm biotechnology. His breakthrough came when he realized that the creature's adaptive abilities could be turned against them. He developed a virus that made swarm organisms attack their own bioships. "It is beautiful," he said as he watched the first infected swarm vessel tear itself apart. They think they are so smart, adapting to everything, but they cannot adapt to themselves. The virus spread through the swarm fleet like wildfire. Bioships that had been consuming the planet suddenly turned on each other. The hive mind that controlled them could not distinguish between friend and foe as the infection scrambled their neural patterns. Corporal Helen Davis led night raids against swarm nursery ships. These massive vessels contained the next generation of swarm entities, growing in vast biotanks like some nightmare aquarium. Davis and her team did not just destroy the nurseries, they corrupted them. "We inject the growth medium with human DNA," she explained to a horrified Threxian observer. "The baby swarm creatures try to adapt to human genetic patterns, but human DNA is too chaotic for their systems. They tear themselves apart from the inside." The psychological impact on the swarm was unprecedented. For the first time in their million-year existence, the collective consciousness experienced something it had never known: fear. Major Chris Turner had been leading deep strike operations into swarm core territories. His teams used captured swarm biotechnology to create weapons that would have horrified any civilized military. Living ammunition that ate through swarm armor, breathing weapons that infected the air itself with anti-swarm toxins. "The beautiful thing about fighting monsters," Turner said as he examined a new bioweapon that looked like a cross between a rifle and a spider, "is that you do not have to feel guilty about using their own tools against them. But the tools were changing the humans who used them." Turner's eyes had developed the same cold calculation as swarm drones. His speech patterns had become clipped and efficient. When he smiled, it looked more like a predator showing its teeth. The tide of battle shifted in ways that defied all military logic. The swarm, which had never retreated in their entire existence, began to pull back from Threxia Prime. Their bioships fled into space as human-designed viruses turned their own biology against them. Dr. Rachel Collins made the final breakthrough that ended the siege. She had been working on ways to disrupt the swarm's quantum communication network. Her solution was elegant and terrible. "We use human consciousness as a weapon," she explained to Morrison over a secure channel. "The swarm's hive mind operates on frequencies similar to human brain patterns. If we synchronize our thoughts, we can create a feedback loop that will destroy their collective intelligence." "What kind of synchronization?" Morrison asked. "Pain," Collins replied simply. "Humans are very good at sharing pain. We broadcast our suffering directly into their neural network. We make them feel what their victims felt. All of their victims." The psychic assault that followed broke something fundamental in the swarm's collective consciousness. For the first time, the ancient enemy experienced the agony they had inflicted on countless worlds. The pain of dying civilizations, the terror of consumed populations, the despair of extinct species. The swarm fleet above Threxia Prime did not just retreat. It fled in complete panic, bioships colliding with each other in their desperate attempt to escape the psychic screaming that filled their shared mind. In the Planetary Defense Center, Admiral Korth watched in amazement and horror as his most feared enemy ran away like frightened children. The humans had done the impossible. They had broken the swarm's will to fight, but the victory celebration was muted. The humans who had saved Threxia Prime were not the same people who had arrived 6 months earlier. They stood apart from their alien allies, their eyes holding a coldness that made veteran soldiers uncomfortable. Morrison accepted the Threxian Medal of Honor in a ceremony that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. When he spoke to the assembled crowd, his words chilled every alien who heard them. "We did what was necessary," he said, his voice carrying no emotion. "We became what we needed to become. The question now is whether the galaxy can live with what we have become." In the crowd, a young Threxian officer named Brix whispered to his companion, "They saved us, but I am afraid of them." His companion nodded. I think that was the point. Admiral Korth met with Morrison privately after the ceremony. The human captain looked tired in a way that sleep could not cure. "What happens now?" Korth asked. "Now you learn to live with the consequences of your choices," Morrison replied. "You wanted to see what humans could do in war. You have seen it. The swarm is broken, but so are we. The galaxy is safe, but the humans who saved it will never be the same. Can you go back to being what you were before?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "I do not think so. We crossed lines that cannot be uncrossed. We became weapons, and weapons do not become tools again. They just wait for the next war." As if summoned by his words, a priority message arrived. From the Galactic Council. Another threat had emerged in the Andromeda Galaxy. The Council was requesting human assistance once again. Morrison read the message and deleted it without responding. But across the galaxy, other human units were already changing course toward the new threat. The galaxy had learned what humans could do in war. The question now was whether they could live with the knowledge. The war ended not with a great battle, but with silence. Across the galaxy, void swarm bioships drifted empty through space. The ancient enemy that had consumed 2,000 worlds simply stopped fighting. Their massive fleets gathered at the edge of known space and vanished into the dark void between galaxies. For the first time in recorded history, the void swarm had been defeated. The victory celebration on Threxia Prime filled the largest stadium on the planet. Millions of Threxians gathered to honor their saviors. But the cheering felt forced. Admiral Korth stood at the podium, giving a speech about courage and sacrifice, but his words rang hollow. In the VIP section, the human soldiers sat apart from everyone else. Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Parker, Sergeant Walsh, and Specialist. Rodriguez looked like they were attending someone else's funeral. Their eyes held a distance that went beyond battle fatigue. "Ladies and gentlemen of the galaxy," Korth said, his voice echoing through the stadium. "We are here to honor those who saved not just our world, but our entire civilization. The human soldiers who fought beside us have shown courage beyond measure." The crowd applauded, but it was polite applause. Respectful, fearful. Morrison stood when his name was called. He walked to the podium with mechanical precision, his movements those of a man who had forgotten how to be anything but a weapon. When he accepted the Medal of Honor, the highest decoration the Threxian Empire could bestow, his face showed no emotion. "Thank you," he said into the microphone. His voice was flat, empty. "We did what was asked of us. We stopped the swarm. The galaxy is safe." He paused, looking out at the sea of alien faces. Threxians, Cathera, Zelani, dozens of species that had never known defeat until they met humanity. "But I want you to understand something," Morrison continued. "We did not win this war through superior technology or better tactics. We won because we were willing to become something you could not become. We won because we were willing to cross lines you would not cross." The stadium was completely silent now. "The void swarm consumed worlds without mercy. So we learned to fight without mercy. They adapted to every weapon we used against them. So we made ourselves into weapons they could not adapt to. They turned life into death. So we turned death into life and fed it back to them." Morrison held up the medal, its crystalline surface catching the stadium lights. "This medal represents victory, but victory has a price. The humans who came to help you 6 months ago no longer exist. We became something else, something necessary, something that could do what needed to be done." He looked directly at Admiral Korth. "You asked us to save your people. We did. But the cost was not paid in blood or ships or resources. The cost was paid in souls, in the part of us that made us human instead of just another weapon." The silence stretched on as thousands of beings processed what they were hearing. "The war is over," Morrison said finally. "The swarm is gone. Your children are safe. Remember that when you look at us and feel afraid. Remember that we paid the price so you would not have to." He stepped down from the podium and walked out of the stadium. His team followed without a word. The celebration continued, but the joy had gone out of it. Later, on the transport ship heading back to Earth, the human soldiers sat in their quarters staring at nothing. Amy Parker was the first to break the silence. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked. Danny Walsh looked up from the alien weapon he was cleaning. It was not regulation human equipment. It was something he had taken from a swarm bioship, modified with human engineering and Threxian technology. It should not have existed. "Does it matter?" he replied. "The job is done." Lisa Rodriguez was monitoring communication channels from across the galaxy. Reports were coming in of other species, studying human tactics. Military academies were adding courses on asymmetric warfare and psychological operations. The brutal efficiency of human warfare was being copied, refined, spread. "We started something," she said quietly. "Other species are learning to fight, like us." Morrison looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council was debating humanity's future. Reports spoke of new threats emerging in distant galaxies. Already, some voices were calling for human military assistance. "Good," he said. "Maybe next time they will not need us." But even as he said it, he knew it was not true. The galaxy had tasted victory through human methods. They would want more. On Zentari Prime, Elder Vexus stood alone in the council chambers. The emergency session had ended hours ago, but he remained, staring at the holographic displays that showed the aftermath of human warfare. Entire swarm-controlled systems were now dead zones, poisoned by weapons that made the worlds uninhabitable for any form of life. The humans had not just defeated the swarm. They had sterilized hundreds of planets to ensure the enemy could never return. Chancellor Mort entered the chamber, her tentacles moving in patterns that indicated deep concern. "The vote passed," she said. "We are offering the humans full membership in the Galactic Defense Coalition, with complete autonomy over military operations." Vexus's crystal body dimmed. "Did anyone listen to my warnings about creating a weapon we cannot control?" "They listened," Mort replied, "but they also saw the results. The swarm is gone. Humanity's methods work." "Their methods work," Vexus agreed. "But at what cost? Have you read the psychological profiles on the human soldiers? They show characteristics normally associated with predator species, pack-hunting behaviors, territorial aggression, a complete lack of empathy for anything they classify as prey. They saved billions of lives. They saved billions of lives by becoming something that might threaten billions more." Vexus turned to face his colleague. "We created super predators and taught them that violence solves problems. What happens when they decide we are the problem?" Mort's tentacles writhed uncomfortably. "Surely you are being overly cautious. They are still essentially human." "Are they?" Vexus brought up new displays showing recent reports from human-advised military units, soldiers who had learned to think like weapons, officers who spoke of battle in terms of hunting, entire units that seemed to enjoy violence for its own sake. "The infection is spreading," he continued. "Human military doctrine is being adopted by species across the galaxy. We are all learning to fight like humans. We are all becoming more ruthless, more willing to cross ethical lines, more focused on victory at any cost." A new alert chimed on the communication system. Both council members turned to read the incoming message. "Reports of unknown hostile activity in the Andromeda Galaxy," Mort read aloud. "Requesting immediate human military assistance." Vexus watched as his worst fears began to come true. The galaxy had become addicted to human warfare. Every threat would now be met with human methods. Every conflict would escalate to human levels of brutality. "Send the message," he said quietly. "What?" "Send the request to the humans. They will come. They always come when there is a war to fight. because that is what we made them into. On Earth, General Patricia Hayes sat in her office reading after-action reports from the Void Swarm campaign. The documents painted a clear picture of military success and human transformation. Captain Morrison's team had saved the galaxy. They had also become something that barely qualified as human anymore. The soldiers returning from alien wars were different, harder, colder, more willing to use violence as a first resort instead of a last one. A priority message appeared on her screen. Another threat in another galaxy. Another request for human military intervention. Hayes stared at the message for a long time. She thought about the young soldiers who had left Earth full of hope and returned as living weapons. She thought about the galaxy that had asked for humanity's help and gotten more than they bargained for. She thought about Elder Vexus's warning, which had reached Earth through intelligence channels. Some weapons were too dangerous to use, but the message was marked urgent. Billions of lives hung in the balance. Another species needed saving, and humanity was the only force proven capable of stopping galaxy-level threats. Hayes authorized the deployment. Across Earth, soldiers who had tasted alien warfare began preparing for another campaign. They cleaned weapons that should not exist. They reviewed tactics that violated every convention of civilized warfare. They prepared to become weapons once again. Captain Morrison received his orders while sitting in a bar in downtown Chicago. The place was full of normal people living normal lives, protected by soldiers like him who had given up the chance to be normal. He read the message twice, then deleted it. He was done. He had paid his price and earned his peace. But as he sat there, surrounded by civilians who would never understand what he had sacrificed for their safety, another message arrived. This one was from Danny Walsh. "Jake, you seeing this Andromeda thing? Looks like our kind of party." Then Amy Parker. "Morrison, my gear is already packed. Just say the word." Then Lisa Rodriguez. "Sir, I have been monitoring the threat. It is big. They need us." Morrison looked around the bar one more time. Normal people talking about normal problems, jobs and relationships and sports scores. Simple human concerns that he barely remembered caring about. He finished his drink and stood up. Some weapons, once drawn, could never be sheathed. The galaxy had learned that lesson too late. They had asked humanity to become monsters to fight. Monsters. Now they would have to live with the consequences. Morrison walked out into the chic.